In the Gospel of John, chapter 15, we read, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit." I grew up in the church. Don't know how many times I heard that passage. Heard it explained so many different ways. Usually it was trying to encourage you to read your Bible regularly, to remain in him or abide in the Lord. And this whole verse, this whole passage didn't come alive to me, frankly, until I was talking to a counselor once. And he was explaining to me what he called the discipline of connection. And he began to explain how human beings in relationship need to connect with one another. I know that sounds sort of obvious, but what he meant was there needs to be an exchange of life between them. They need to share and talk and somehow to make this connection, that the goal is connection and relationship. And what happens often in relationships that begin to disintegrate is that the connection is broken. And people can go through their days, their weeks, their months, even their years disconnected, kind of living parallel lives in the same home, in the same family, but not really connected, not in a life-exchanging relationship. It actually explains how affairs can happen so easily. People work with someone at work and they begin to talk and share and they begin to open up to each other, and before the long they feel this connection. They feel this bond between them and the life that's being exchanged, and particularly if they're in a home or a marriage that there isn't that connection, it feels so life-giving, it feels so good, and soon there's an inappropriate relation that's formed and leads to things and can break up a whole family. You see, connection is in some ways that is another way of talking about bonding and how human beings do this. And you know this, it's not even with people of the opposite sex. You can sit down with some of the same sex and you have a wonderful conversation in which your thoughts and ideas you feel are being heard and understood, and vice versa, and there's this exchange, and you come away feeling so good and so connected to that person. And this is so helpful me in my own marriage when the counselor said, "You know, Larry, sometimes we work so hard at trying to solve problems and come up with solutions when there's a difference, and it creates all this tension." He says, "Why don't you just try understanding? Make the goal, rather than conflict resolution, make it just understanding. Just work hard to understand what your spouse is saying and vice versa, and watch what happens." He said 90% of conflicts will go away. Why? Well, because when you work to understand and listen, and the other person feels valued and listened to, and vice versa, a connection takes place. A life begins to flow between you, and it just shifts the problem in a different perspective, in a different light. And he said the goal of a relationship is connection. Well, when he explained that all to me, it was like light bulbs went on in my head in relationship with the Lord. It wasn't about just reading my Bible and praying and doing those things and whatever it meant to remain in him. I realized that the goal of my relationship with God is connection. That what Jesus was talking about with the vine and the branches, when he said, unless you stay connected to the branch, you won't bear fruit. You've got to have this life. There's this exchange of life between the fruit and the branches, and that flows out and produces things. And he's saying the goal of being in the kingdom and being with me is to stay connected, to have this life-flowing exchange. And so how do you do that? Well, really, it's no different than you do with any relationship. If I want to be connected to my wife, I need to open up and share with her, and she shares with me, and I try to listen well and to hear and understand her, and vice versa. And in the midst of that sharing, there's a connection, a bond that takes place. And that's exactly what happens in our relationship with the Lord when we begin to open up our hearts and just be honest and talk with Him and then listen. And maybe it's listening through reading His Word, or maybe it's just being quiet and still. Maybe it's listening by having some soft worship music going on, or however it works. The goal is not some sort of checklist that I read today, I prayed today. No, the goal is always connection. Connection is where everything happens. I've often said in my teaching and training that in the kingdom, everything flows out of intimacy. Again, this is what Jesus was saying, because he attached staying connected with bearing fruit. Well, now we know this is true in a husband and wife relationship, that when there's exchange and there's warmth and there's connection, it leads to intimacy. And intimacy leads to having children. That's bearing fruit. And Jesus is saying, if you stay connected to me, my divine life will flow into you, and there'll be this exchange, and out of that you will bear fruit. So, as kingdom people, and we long to be fruitful, we want to be fruitful, we want our lives to count. The way they count, the way we'll bear fruit, is to put as a premium, as a priority, as the first thing, staying connected. Years ago, my father, was a pastor, handed me a little cast iron plaque, just a little plaque to put on my desk. All it said was God first. Now that can be taken in so many ways, but understanding the discipline of connection now, I see it as the first and most important thing in every day of my life is staying connected to the Lord. However that happens, whatever that will make that happen, it can happen in so many different ways, but it's about connection. It's about life flow. Because if I have that life flow, I will bear fruit. I will be fruitful. And later on it goes to talk, then my joy will be full. So dear friend, as a kingdom person, if you want to stay in the vine, stay connected to life flows, then do the things like you would in a relationship that keeps you connected. Make the goal in your relationship with the Lord connection. Out of that intimacy, life flows. Fruit is produced. The kingdom is increased.